What if the person you walked by every single day, the one pushing the mop, silently sweeping the halls, was smarter than your entire math department? This isn't just a story about calculus. This is a story about misjudgment, quiet brilliance. And the moment one janitor rewrote an entire school's perspective with a single piece of chalk. When a high school teacher called out a 60-year-old custodian as a joke, what happened next stunned everyone. The whiteboard would never feel the same. Students recorded it. It went viral, but what they didn't record was the story behind the man. This is the full, true, emotional journey of Otis James, a man with no title, no classroom, but with a mind sharper than anyone ever imagined. Stick with us. Because by the end, you might not look at anyone the same way again. It was the kind of Thursday afternoon where time seemed to stand still. At Glenmere High, a small-town school nestled in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia, students weren't exactly known for their enthusiasm by fourth period. Outside, the sky threatened rain, casting a grayish hue across the window panes. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered with a hum that added to the sense of slow academic decay. In room 214, Mr. Terrence Wilburn stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand. He wasn't particularly beloved by the students. He wasn't hated either, just tolerated. Wilburn taught advanced calculus, but you'd never know it by how lifeless his lessons felt. He was tall, wiry, always in a checkered tie and dress shoes that clicked too loud on the tile floor. He had a sharp tongue, a clipped voice, and a knack for sarcasm that left most kids feeling smaller, not smarter. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee, old carpet, and pencil shavings. Phones buzzed quietly in pockets. Sneakers tapped impatiently beneath desks. Most of the students stared blankly at the board, or worse, through it. And then, something shifted. Not in the lesson, not even in the room. It came from the hallway, a quiet squeak of wheels on a mop bucket. Slow, rhythmic, reliable. Mr. Wilburn paused mid-equation. He looked up, lips curving ever so slightly into a smirk. Then, without turning back to the board, he tapped the whiteboard with his marker and raised his voice. "Well, well. Look who's out there," he said. The class turned. Through the open door, you could see a man in dark blue overalls pushing a mop. His pace was calm, deliberate, like he had nowhere urgent to be. Wilburn's grin widened. "Mr. Otis, tell me," he called out loud enough to echo, "think you can solve this little beauty for us?" Some students chuckled, not a full laugh, more like that uneasy kind of giggle when you're not sure if it's okay to laugh. Otis James, the school's 60-year-old custodian, paused in the hallway. He looked up. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, just stood still, hands on the mop handle, eyes on the teacher. Otis was a familiar figure at Glenmere, always polite, always early, kept to himself. Most students barely looked at him beyond a quick morning or thank you when they dropped trash in his rolling bin. He wore the same faded work shirt every day with O. James stitched in white above the pocket. Now he looked into the classroom like he was scanning for something. Then slowly, he stepped in. The mop leaned gently against the wall. A few students sat up straighter. Maybe he'd crack a joke. Maybe he'd smile and walk away. But he didn't. He walked right up to the front of the classroom. "May I?" he asked, his voice even, soft, almost careful. Wilburn raised an eyebrow. "By all means." Someone near the back pulled out a phone, trying to film without drawing attention. The class grew quiet. Even the air felt different. Otis picked up the dry erase marker. He looked at the equation. It was a nested chain rule derivative problem. Not beginner's math. This was college level. Wilburn folded his arms, waiting, smirking. Otis squinted slightly, not from confusion, but like someone reading a road they've driven hundreds of times, just making sure the signs were still where he remembered them. Then he began to write. No flair, no hesitation, just clean, clear lines, step by step. He spoke while he wrote, his voice calm and warm. "This here," he said, "this is all about identifying the composition. Once you isolate that inner function, the rest flows smoother. The marker squeaked gently as he moved down the board. Each line was deliberate, each explanation clear. It was like watching a craftsman at work. No showmanship, just precision. He capped the marker and stepped back. The board looked like a page from a textbook, organized, elegant. He glanced at Mr. Wilburn, then the class. "That's one way to do it," he said simply. And with that, he stepped back, picked up his mop, turned, and walked toward the door. No applause, no boast, just quiet confidence. Like solving a calculus problem in front of a class of stunned students wasn't anything special. But nobody in that room moved. Not at first. Not until Savannah Lynn, a junior sitting near the window, whispered the words that cut through the silence like thunder. He got it right. Mr. Wilburn opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, the man with all the quips had nothing to say. Otis gave a respectful nod, then disappeared down the hallway, mop squeaking softly behind him. And just like that, the energy in room 214 had changed. Forever. What had started as a joke was no longer funny, and no one saw what was coming next. The hallway outside room 214 grew quiet again. Just the faint rhythm of a mop bucket rolling away. But inside the classroom, time was stuck. You could almost hear the students' thoughts tripping over each other. Did that really just happen? Was that real? Mr. Wilburn, still frozen by the board, finally turned around. But he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Otis James had just walked into a calculus class and solved a complex problem like he'd done 100 times before, and then walked out like it was nothing. Students stared at the whiteboard, at the smooth handwriting, at the perfect logic etched in marker. One student, Eli Romero, leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Bro." He didn't even pause. It wasn't just the answer. It was the way he solved it, like it lived in his bones. No calculator, no scratch paper, just a calm voice and a perfect solution. Back in the hallway, Otis kept walking. He didn't look back, didn't linger, didn't even glance at the door. He had places to be, trash bins to empty, floors to sweep. But something had shifted in the way his footsteps echoed, a little slower, a little heavier. Because even if he didn't show it, Otis knew what had just happened wasn't small. It wasn't just about solving math. It was about being seen for the first time in a long time. Back in the classroom, the energy was strange, not chaotic, just unsettled. The kind of silence that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Savannah Lynn, who'd whispered earlier, was still staring at the board. She raised her hand. Mr. Wilburn blinked like he'd forgotten he was a teacher. "Yes, is he like a tutor or something?" she asked. Wilburn cleared his throat. "No," he said flatly, "he's the janitor." That word hit the room differently now. Not with disrespect, but disbelief. The janitor? He couldn't be. Not after that. Not after what they'd just witnessed. Eli raised his hand next. That was the chain rule, right? But like a level up? Wilburn nodded slowly. Technically, yes, but he paused again, searching for words, trying to regain control. But you should be able to do that too. In time. A few kids exchanged glances. They weren't so sure anymore. Not because they didn't believe in themselves, but because Otis made it look effortless. Meanwhile, 2 classrooms down, Otis was fixing a broken door hinge, same hands, same patience. But his mind was somewhere else. He replayed the classroom in his head. The faces, the stunned silence, Mr. Wilburn's voice, cracking just a bit, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A twinge of old muscle memory. Not just of math. Of standing. In front of students. Of explaining concepts. Of being the one they turned to, not the one they passed by. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He just kept working. Back in room 214, phones began buzzing. A clip had made it onto Snap, then Instagram, then TikTok. It wasn't polished, just a shaky video of a man in overalls solving calculus like it was clockwork. The caption? Our janitor just schooled the calc teacher. For real. It blew up. By the next period, kids were whispering in the hall. Did you see it? Yo, he did it in his head. No joke, that dude's a genius. Even the teachers were talking. In the break room, Mrs. Chen, who taught English Lit, asked aloud, "Who is he?" No one had a full answer. He'd been at Glenmere for 5 years. Always early, never missed a day. Kind, quiet, invisible. Until now. Later that afternoon, Otis returned to the janitor's closet. He closed the door, sat on a stool, and took a breath. On the shelf above him, tucked between old Windex bottles and replacement light bulbs, was a worn notebook. He reached for it, opened it. Inside, pages of hand-drawn diagrams, equations, formulas written in small, neat print. He hadn't opened it in months, maybe years, but today, something had changed. Not in the world. In him. That moment when he walked up to that board, it wasn't planned. It wasn't pride. It was instinct. Something long buried had stirred again, and he wasn't sure if it would go back to sleep. Down. The hall. The bell rang. Students poured into the corridor, buzzing with new energy, and somewhere someone whispered, "I think Mr. James used to be a professor or something." The rumor mill had begun. But Otis? He wasn't thinking about rumors. He was thinking about what came next. Because when you step up to the board, without permission, without apology, and the whole room watches you rewrite the narrative, there's no going back. The video spread faster than gossip at a small-town diner. By the time 6th period started, everyone at Glenmere High had seen it. Some had rewatched it 3, 4 times. That moment, the silence before Otis started writing, the calm in his voice, the steady way his hand moved across the whiteboard like he wasn't solving a problem. But remembering something, Savannah Lynn posted it first. No filters, no music, just a 10-second clip. Caption: when your janitor solves a problem your teacher skipped. By the end of the day, it had over 12,000 views. Not just students. Not just parents, strangers, people from other states, commenting, sharing, tagging. Is this real? He's smoother than my college calc professor. Dude belongs at MIT. Otis didn't know any of this. Not yet. While social media buzzed, he was unclogging the sink in the teacher's lounge. His knees creaked as he stood up. Wiped his hands on a cloth tucked in his back pocket. Miss Ochoa, the Spanish teacher, paused. As she passed, she gave him a small nod. "Mr. James," she said softly. "That was impressive." Otis blinked, then gave a polite smile. "Just dusting off old tricks, ma'am." He didn't elaborate, didn't explain, and she didn't press, because something in the way he said it told her there was more, a lot more. That night, in his small apartment just off Route 7, Otis sat at the kitchen table. He brewed his tea like always, 2 bags, a splash of honey, steam rising into the quiet. Then he did something he hadn't done. Years. He pulled out the old leather-bound notebook from the top kitchen shelf, the one behind the dusty box of pancake mix. Inside were notes, pages upon pages of formulas, diagrams, tutoring sketches. He traced one with his finger. A memory flickered. Sophomore year at Carolina Tech, he'd been a rising star, mechanical engineering. Dean's list, even helped teach some first-year seminars, until the call came, his father's. Accident, sudden, fatal, and everything changed. He left school, took care of his siblings, promised himself he'd return. 1 semester off turned into 2, then 5 years, then forever. Now he was 60, not bitter, but quiet. Mathematics had always stayed with him. Not for money, not for titles, just because it made sense. It was honest. Unlike life. At school the next morning he clocked in early, as usual. Started wiping down the cafeteria tables before sunrise. But something was different. When he passed room 214, the door was open. Lights off. Mr. Wilburn wasn't there yet, but 3 students were, Savannah, Eli, and a freshman Otis didn't know. All 3 sat silently. Waiting. Not for class. For him. Savannah looked up. Mr. James, can we ask you something? Otis paused. Mop in hand. Go on. That problem, she said. How did you know what to do so fast? Otis took a long breath. Math's not about speed, he said. It's about clarity. Eli tilted his head. But you didn't even blink. Otis smiled faintly. I've seen that type of problem before. He stepped inside, looked at the whiteboard, then back at them. You got a marker? Eli tossed him one, and just like that, Otis started again. Not with the same problem, a new one, but the same rhythm. Slow, clear. He talked through each step, not down. To them, with them. He asked questions, listened, gave space. And when Eli solved the final step himself, he didn't cheer, just smiled, like a light had been turned on. It wasn't about Otis showing off. It was about helping them see they could do it too. When Mr. Wilburn walked in 10 minutes later, the room was silent again. 4 heads turned toward the board, 1 janitor, 3 students, 1 solved equation. Perfect. Mr. Wilburn stood in the doorway, frozen, his tie slightly askew, his coffee untouched. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, then took his seat. That day in class, he didn't call on students randomly, didn't make sarcastic jokes. He just taught. Softly, like he was still, absorbing what had happened. But the students? They weren't the same anymore, because someone had shown them something powerful. That knowledge doesn't always wear a suit, and sometimes the man pushing the mop knows more than the man holding the chalk. By Friday morning, the school wasn't the same. Neither was Otis. Not because he changed, but because the world around him did. He walked through the halls with the same steady pace, same keys jingling from his belt, same mop bucket trailing softly behind. But the stairs? Different? Softer, longer, some with respect, some with curiosity, some with outright confusion. Morning, Mr. James. A senior called out from her locker. He nodded. Morning. She smiled. Last week she might not have even noticed him. Now, he was a name. A presence. A story. Down the main hallway, the digital announcement board had a new headline. Janitor or Genius. Glenmare's Otis. James went viral overnight. A few teachers had seen the video. More than a few, actually. Miss Ochoa showed it to her entire Spanish class. Mr. Levy, who coached basketball, said, Man broke that thing down smoother than I cut tape. Even the librarian, Mrs. Callahan, who barely said more than shh, leaned in and whispered, That man has something special, but it wasn't just in Glenmere. That video, it caught fire. Not flashy, not clickbait, just real raw. Otis, standing calmly at a whiteboard solving a problem and walking away like it was nothing. The comments rolled in. Who is he? Someone hire this man to teach. My high school. Janitor never did this. He explained it better than my YouTube tutor. By noon, it had over 60,000 views. Local news reached out to the school. A reporter named Jenna McBride from Appalachian Today sent an email. We'd love to speak with Mr. James about his story. This is more than math, it's about rediscovery. Principal Sanders saw the message. He didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure how Otis would feel about all this attention. Because Otis? He wasn't online, didn't use Twitter, barely had a phone, still used a flip, didn't check email, didn't crave the spotlight, and when Sanders mentioned the video, Otis just blinked. There's a video? He asked. Yes, Sanders said. It's gone a bit viral. Otis shrugged. I just solved a problem. But it's how you did it, the principal replied. People noticed. Otis didn't smile, didn't frown either, just nodded. Then, asked if the Science Wing's water fountain was still leaking. Later that day, in the cafeteria, 2 freshmen approached his cart. One held a printed photo of the whiteboard, the problem Otis had solved. Sir, he said, I tried this at home. Can you show me where I messed up? Otis paused, then looked at the paper quietly, carefully. He pointed. "Here," he said. "You forgot to apply the product rule before simplifying." The student blinked. "Oh." And just like that, Otis became more than a janitor again. He became a mentor, a quiet one, but no less powerful. By the end of the week, there was a list, posted anonymously on the library corkboard. Ask Mr. James Sessions. Mon wed fry, no. One knew who started it, but the list filled quickly. Names, times, questions scribbled beside them, not for extra credit, not for grades, for understanding. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, the conversations shifted. What's his background? Did anyone ever ask? Why is he even here if he's this gifted? Theories bloomed. Maybe he was a retired professor, maybe a failed engineer, maybe he had a past. But the truth? No one knew, not even the district office. Principal Sanders made a call to HR. He's been with us for 6 years. No prior academic record attached to his file. Just work history, just janitor. But clearly he was more. That weekend, the video made it to a national education forum. An MIT graduate commented, "This guy's method is cleaner than some of my colleagues. Give him a classroom." And then it really took off. Morning shows started inquiring. Podcasts reached out. Education blogs ran headlines. The janitor who out-taught the teacher. Otis didn't know. He was at home, folding laundry, making chili, reading an old copy of Scientific American he picked up from the library's giveaway box. Peaceful. Simple. Until Monday morning when he walked into school and found 3 strangers in the hallway. They wore press badges. One held a camera, another had a mic. Otis froze. Principal Sanders appeared quickly, escorted them away gently, then turned to Otis. "They want your story." Otis looked down at his hands. Calloused, worn, steady. "I don't have a story," he said. "I just know math." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Because somehow, a moment meant only to pass the time had opened a door. Not just to attention, to connection, to being seen. And that was only the beginning. It started with a question. Simple, honest. From a 12-year-old girl named Marley, she had just finished lunch, her tray still in her hands. She saw Otis wiping down the lunch tables, walked up and asked, "Mr. James, were you always good at math?" Otis looked up, met her eyes, then said, "I guess I always saw numbers clearer than people." She blinked, didn't fully get it, but smiled anyway, and something about her asking made him remember things he hadn't thought about in years. That night, Otis didn't turn on the TV, didn't boil water for tea, didn't even take off his boots. He sat on the edge of his bed, reached under the frame, pulled out an old storage box, covered in dust. Inside, a faded Carolina Tech sweatshirt, a cracked calculator, a manila envelope stuffed with creased papers, and a photo of him and his dad, orientation day. Bright smiles, bright hopes. That box held pieces of a life that felt like someone else's now. But they were his, once. Back then he was Otis the scholar, not Otis the janitor. Grew up in Rock Hollow, North Carolina, a town with more trees than traffic lights. His dad, Otis Sr., was a mechanic. His mom, Teresa, worked nights at the textile mill. They didn't have much, but what they had, they shared. Otis was the youngest of 5, but the first to love equations. He'd sit for hours watching raindrops hit the windows and try to predict patterns. At 9, he fixed the family's broken radio. At 12, he built a mini windmill that lit up their porch. His mom said, "Boy, you got something special in your head. Don't let the world dull it." So he didn't. At 17, he got a full ride to Carolina Tech, mechanical engineering. Moved into the dorms with a duffel bag and a dream. First semester, he was unstoppable. Professors noticed. One offered him a tutoring assistantship. Another asked him to co-write a research paper. His future was unfolding, crisp, clear, linear, until it wasn't. Second year, October. He was in the lab when he got the call. His dad had been in a highway accident, oil truck, no seatbelt, gone on impact. Otis went home that night, Didn't go back for 3 weeks. Tried, but his mind wasn't the same. Too heavy, too quiet. His mom never fully recovered. Bills piled up, he dropped a class. Then two. Then everything said it would be temporary. Said he'd go back, but temporary turned into 10 years. By the time he tried to reapply, the credits had expired. He didn't fight it, just moved on. Took whatever jobs he could. Bus depot cleaner, auto parts clerk, night janitor at a law office in Raleigh. The one constant? Numbers always. He'd solve problems in his head to pass time, read engineering books at thrift shops, kept one notebook just for himself, quiet learning, no one watching, no one judging. Years blurred. Jobs came and went. Eventually, he landed at Glenmere. School needed someone reliable. Otis needed something steady, and that was it. Until now, until that whiteboard, that problem, that voice inside him that said, "You still remember this." And the students? They saw it. They felt it. Even if they didn't know the whole story, they knew something had changed. Mr. James wasn't just the man who mopped floors. He was the man who made them believe they could understand things they used to fear. The past, it never truly disappeared. It just waited. And now it was starting to speak again, not with regret, but with possibility. It started with one student, then two, then five. Every day after lunch, they gathered quietly by the janitor's closet, not to complain, not to gossip, but to ask questions. Real ones, about math, about how to solve certain equations, about how Mr. James made it seem simple. At first, Otis was surprised, then cautious. "Why me?" he asked one day. A girl named Tia, clutching a pre-calc worksheet, answered without hesitation. "Because you explain it like it matters." That stopped him, right there, because for the first time in decades, someone said it mattered. Word spread fast. Soon, the hallway outside room 107, where Otis kept his supplies, became its own version of a tutoring center. No signs, no chairs, just students leaning against lockers, paper in hand, eyes eager. They called it office hours. Otis called it strange. But he never turned them away, not once. He helped them find mistakes without making them feel small. He praised effort before perfection. He never rushed. Never made them feel dumb. That alone was different from what they were. Some teachers noticed. Miss Avery, the art teacher, passed by one day and whispered to a colleague, "That man's teaching better than half of us." It wasn't meant as an insult, just a realization, a reminder. That knowledge wears many uniforms, even navy blue ones with bleach stains and broken zippers. By the end of the week, more than 24 students had been taught by Mr. James. No grades, no pressure, just clarity. Some brought friends. Others brought questions their own teachers hadn't answered. Even those who usually coasted through math were showing up. Because there was something different in how he made them feel. Smart, capable, seen. During one of these hallway sessions, Mr. Wilburn passed by. He didn't say a word, didn't stop. But he did look. Longer than usual, his face unreadable, and something in his eyes. Wasn't quite anger, but it wasn't comfort either. Later that day in the teacher's lounge, Mr. Wilburn sat alone. Usually he talked, made offhand remarks, kept the room light, but not today. He sipped coffee, stared out the window, said nothing. "Miss," Shoa noticed. "You all right?" she asked. Wilburn didn't answer at first, then said softly, "I've been teaching calc for 15 years. She nodded. "And?" He stared at his cup. "A janitor explained the chain rule better than I ever have." Ochoa didn't argue, didn't reassure, just said, "Maybe that's not a bad thing." Because it wasn't. Not really. Back in the hall, Otis helped a senior named Jordan with his SAT prep. The boy was nervous, had failed the math section twice already. Otis didn't judge, didn't sigh, just said, "Let's take it slow." And they did. Step by step. By the end of the week, Jordan could solve functions without second-guessing. He walked taller, smiled more, and every time he passed Otis, he gave a fist bump and said, My guy. One afternoon, Principal Sanders pulled Otis aside. There's talk, he said. Good talk, Otis raised an eyebrow. They're calling you a mentor, Sanders added. Otis chuckled. I mop floors. And now you inspire futures, Sanders replied. That stuck with him. Later that night, Otis stood at his mirror. Same uniform, same face, but something in his posture felt different, lighter, more present. He thought about his mom. What she'd say, now you see, baby? You were never just cleaning up, you were preparing the way, and for the first time in years. He believed it. It started with a phone call, not from a parent, not from a student, but from the district office. Principal Sanders answered. He expected questions about budgets or substitute shortages. Instead, he heard, We've received quite a few inquiries about one of your custodial staff. Sanders adjusted in his chair. You must be talking about Mr. James. Yes, the voice replied. The board wants to know more. That afternoon, Sanders walked the length of the school, clipboard in hand. He found Otis repairing a loose ceiling tile outside the gym. Mr. James, Sanders said gently. Otis climbed down the ladder, wiped dust off his hands. Something wrong? No, Sanders said. Something right. He handed Otis a sheet of paper, an invitation to a private board meeting. Just a conversation, Sanders explained. No pressure. They just want to understand who you are. Otis stared at the letter. Didn't answer right away. Didn't smile. Just nodded once. 2 days later, he walked into the district office wearing his cleanest uniform, boots polished, shirt ironed, hat left at home. He sat across from 5 people, board members, curious, respectful, but cautious. We've heard a lot, one of them began. We saw the video. Otis nodded. I didn't know it was being filmed. No one's blaming you, another chimed in. In fact, we're impressed. Otis leaned forward, his voice steady. I didn't plan to teach. I just didn't want the student to feel dismissed. There was silence. Then someone asked, Do you have a background in education? Otis paused, then told them the story. Carolina Tech. Engineering major. Family tragedy. Dropped out, never went back. But he never stopped learning and never stopped believing numbers had meaning. The room grew quiet again until one board member leaned. Would you consider working with students officially? Otis raised an eyebrow. You mean teaching? Not in the traditional sense, they clarified. We'd like to pilot a tutoring initiative, after school, small groups, optional attendance. Otis thought for a long moment, then asked the only question that mattered to him. Will they want to be there? Yes, came the answer. Then I'll be there too, he said. Back at Glenmere, word spread fast. An official program. With Mr. James, posters appeared on bulletin boards. After school math lab led by Mr. James. The sign-up list filled in hours. The first session had more than 20 students. Some brought snacks, some brought notebooks. All brought curiosity. Otis walked in carrying a small box of supplies. Markers, scratch paper, a whiteboard on wheels. He didn't lecture. He didn't assign homework. He just listened. Answered. Guided. Sometimes, he didn't even talk. He let the students talk to each other, solve problems as a team, cheer when they got it right, laugh when they stumbled. Because the room wasn't about being right. It was about learning, about trying, about showing up. Even Mr. Wilburn showed up once, stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. He didn't speak, but he didn't leave early either. By the 3rd week, the math lab was standing room only. Even freshmen who used to avoid the library now showed up early, waiting for Otis to arrive. Principal Sanders visited one afternoon, stood in the doorway for 10 minutes without saying a word, just watching. When the session ended, he pulled Otis aside. I don't say this lightly, he began, but you've built something special. Otis looked at the room behind them, students packing up, laughing, high-fiving, and said, I didn't build it. I just opened the door. Sanders smiled. Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. And it was. Because recognition doesn't always come with awards or promotions. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the way students sit taller, speak clearer, try harder. And for Otis James, that was more than enough. The library didn't usually feel this alive, but on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, it buzzed, not with noise, but with purpose. Otis James arrived early, carried the same worn box of supplies, set up the whiteboard, checked the markers, wiped the table, then sat, waited, and one by one they came. Isaiah, the freshman who once hated numbers, now solving quadratic equations with ease. Jasmine, who used to think math wasn't for people like her, now helping her younger brother with his homework at home. Leo, the senior who barely showed up to class, now asking questions Otis had to pause before answering. Each session was different. Some days the room was quiet and focused. Other days, laughter filled the corners. But always there was growth. Otis didn't act like a teacher. He didn't stand at the front. He sat beside them, leaned in, asked questions, waited for their answers, and when they stumbled, he didn't correct them harshly. He guided them back to the path, back to themselves. Word spread beyond the school. Parents started showing up at pickup time just to shake his hand. One mom said, "My son talks about math now, at dinner." Another said, "Whatever you're doing, thank you." Otis never knew what to say, so he just smiled and nodded. Because this wasn't part of the plan, but maybe it was part of something bigger. Even teachers started coming by. Miss Avery asked to observe. Coach Daniels asked for help setting up a math boot camp over the summer. Even Mr. Wilburn returned, not with crossed arms, but with a question. He stood near the back after one session, waited for the students to leave, then said, "You." "No, I used to think teaching was about control." Otis turned, didn't interrupt. Wilburn continued, "Now I see it's about connection." Otis didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "We all learn that eventually," he said. Wilburn nodded, then added, almost whispering, "Thanks for the reminder." That moment mattered, because even the proudest people sometimes need a second beginning. And Otis, he'd become that beginning for many, without a title, without a degree, just by showing up, by caring, by listening. The school board called again. This time with a new offer. Formalize the program, make it a permanent elective. Not for credit, they said, just for enrichment. Otis sat with Principal Sanders in the office, read the proposal, then looked up. "I'm honored," he said, "but I don't need a class. I need them to come because they want to." Sanders respected that, so they kept it simple. The kids still came. They still called it Mr. James' time. No one missed it, because it was more than a session. It was a space, safe, encouraging, real. At the year-end showcase, the school set up a booth called Difficult Problems, Simple Truths. It displayed student reflections, letters, drawings, quotes. 1. Good Mr. James didn't just teach math. He taught me to trust my brain. Another. He made numbers feel like friends. Otis stood in the back, didn't wear a suit, didn't give a speech. He just stood there, hands folded, watching the kids smile, watching parents tear up. Later that night, back in his apartment, he opened the box one last time, the old sweatshirt, the faded calculator, the transcript from a life paused too soon. He placed them carefully in a new bin, added one more thing, a stack of thank you notes, folded neatly, dated, labeled. Spring term, my students, and he realized something. Legacy isn't built in classrooms or titles or plaques on walls. It's built in moments, in patience, in second chances, in how many lights you help turn on. And Otis? He planned to keep flipping that switch, one student at a time. You've just met Otis James, a man who swept floors, fixed leaks, and quietly carried a knowledge deeper than most ever realized. But more than his ability to solve problems, it was his ability to unlock others that changed everything. He didn't want recognition. Didn't need titles. He just showed up, listened, taught, and proved that brilliance doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes, it comes with a mop, and maybe, just maybe, the smartest person in the room is the one you've been overlooking all along. So next time you pass someone in silence, look again, because behind every uniform, every quiet nod, every pair of tired eyes, there might be a story, a loss, a gift, a legacy. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever felt unseen, someone who once believed they missed their shot, or someone who helped you believe in yourself. Because sometimes, the strongest minds live in the quietest places, and their light, it's just waiting for a moment to shine.